I'll put it out there. Like I go to a therapist every week just to work on myself, just to work on things I'm not good at, because I have like triggers and stupid stuff from my childhood that makes it difficult for me to do certain things.
Coach Greg, and today I'm with special guest Dr. Layne Norton, who has a PhD in nutritional sciences. Happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Greg.
All right, well, let's just jump right into this. So before we even talk about this, like there's some people that probably never heard of you. I'm surprised they haven't by this point, but can you just tell people in general, like, what is your channel all about and like, what do you do? What's your style?
Yeah, so I would consider myself either one of two ways, either a nerd who's really into lifting weights or a meathead who's a science geek as well. So just brief background on me. I got into lifting when I was a teenager because I got bullied a lot, and got into competing in bodybuilding when I was 19 years old. Won a pro card in a couple of the natural organizations, won a pro show as a natural guy. Then went into powerlifting and actually ended up being better at powerlifting than I was at bodybuilding. Won 2 national championships for the USAPL, and then got a silver medal at Worlds and set a squat record at that time. And so my channel is kind of, I would say I speak to who I was as a 19-year-old, which is somebody who read all the muscle magazines and got really sick of how everything contradicted everything else. Even like one magazine would say, well, you got to do low carb. And the other magazine would say, no, you need insulin for building muscle, and go back and forth. And I found there was a real gap in the industry of, it was either somebody was a pencil neck geek who read all the studies, or they were a big dumb jock. I mean, I'm kind of characterizing here, but and so my channel started just kind of to where it is now is basically I consider myself a science communicator. So I want to go through these studies. I want to go through a lot of the topics that people are interested in and try to break down, really advanced research studies, but in a way that's, one, palatable for people to understand, and 2, practical. So whenever I break down a study, at the end, it's always, okay, here's what this means for you. And I just try to take a lot of the mystery out of scientific, science in fitness and nutrition and lifting.
Yeah, and actually, I did a Natty or Not on you in the past. People may not remember that. It was probably a couple years ago. And I actually consider yourself kind of like a cross between myself, because you're going to tell it like it is, no bullshit, and Derek from Plates for Dates, More Plates, More Dates, because he talks about studies and all this stuff, but more geared towards the nutritional aspect because your expertise is on nutrition. Derek more so PDs, and myself maybe so just dieting, losing weight, training a bit, but basically a combination of everything. And in case people are wondering, I actually said that you were natural in the video. They're probably curious on what I thought. There it is, shredded.
Don't tell them. No, I mean, that was, I think, what did somebody say? A physique that everyone thinks is natural is probably a physique that isn't worth having, Well, exactly.
If no one accuses you of being enhanced, then do you even lift?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, it's funny, like when you're young, you're like, oh man, I wish I could get accused of being on steroids. And then once it happens, you go, hey, hang on, I worked really freaking hard for this, But I think it's just the nature of the beast, especially with younger kids, and especially seeing like how many people who are like, no, I'm natural, and it's just over the top, ridiculous. I understand why people have a very, a distrust of people who claim that. But what I would always tell people is, if you look at the course of my lifting career, you never saw a big jump. And really in the last 10 years, you haven't really seen me look different because I had been lifting for 10 years ago. And once you're past that point, you're just not going to put on a lot of lean body mass as a natural.
Yeah, unlike, Mike O'Hearn, these guys are improving to their 50s, very unlikely that's not natural. Who knows? You never know. But speaking of being natural, do you think you'd ever take HRT? Like, I'm on HRT, and geez, they ran out of HRT, what I was prescribed just the other day. Had to get another prescription for something else. But now that you're getting older, you're not as old as me, but do you think you'd ever get into that?
Good question. I'll never say never, you know what I mean? Like, if it was impacting like my quality of life, I might consider it. But honestly, every time I've gotten my testosterone measured, I'm like very high. I mean, natural. If I'm dieting for a show, like I've had my test measured when I was like a week out from a show, and it was like hypogonadal, which is very normal for natural bodybuilders. Virtually all of them in the studies are hypogonadal by the point they're on stage. But when I was in my off season, I'd be anywhere from 800 to like 1050. So
wow.
And even like 2 years ago, I mean, I'm 39, I'll be 40 this year. But even 2 years ago, I was still in the 900s. So, I don't really feel like I'd probably need it. And I still feel good. I have plenty of energy, good libido, all that kind of stuff. So if it was starting to negatively impact my quality of life, I might. But right now, it's not something I would really consider.
I mean, it sounds like there's no reason you need to. I mean, I'm even on HRT, and I've never had those numbers that high. My doctor even let me go that high. I wish it was that high. So yeah, consider yourself lucky. I always say it's a lot to do with genetics. Clearly, you have good genetics. I mean, how can you set like such high lifts in the deadlift, squat, all these numbers without having great genetics? Obviously, you work hard, you know what you're doing, but there's still that genetic component.
Of course, and the best athletes in any sport are the people who work hard and also have really good genetics. So. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So really wanted to touch on this. A lot of people have been talking about this, the whole topic on metabolisms. And people used to say, you're getting older, you're fat because your metabolism is slowed down. And a recent study came out. You talked about it. Many others talked about it. And it kind of showed, well, it's not metabolism. But yet people are gaining weight. So if we can't blame metabolism, explain to people, if it's not your metabolism shutting down, why is it that people are gaining body fat between the ages of 30, 40, 50, 60? What's going on there?
Well, the first thing I would say to people, if you look at the obesity epidemic, it's getting younger and younger, right? Like even young children are starting to have like high rates of obesity, well before metabolism starts to slow down. But just to recap for people who aren't familiar with the study, basically they looked at, it was over 6,000 subjects, and anywhere from 8 days old to 95 years old. And what they found was metabolism does increase in like the first year of life and then kind of peaks around 1 or 2 years and then steadily falls off at about 20 years old. So really, if anybody's getting spontaneously fat from slow metabolism, it should be like 1 or 2 years old. But from age 20 to age 60, it stays pretty much rock steady in terms of your total daily energy expenditure and your basal metabolic rate, which for people who aren't familiar, just a quick distinction, your total daily energy expenditure is literally the entirety of the energy you expend during a day. And the way they measure that is with something called doubly labeled water, which is actually really cool, a stable isotope technique that is minimally invasive, so it's really easy to get large numbers of people, thankfully. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. But for your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, which is just about 50 to 70% of your total daily energy expenditure, that's basically the cost. If I just laid down and didn't go to sleep and just breathed, that's your basal metabolism. And so typically that's what people refer to when they're talking about metabolic rate. But at the end of the day, it's your total daily energy expenditure that really makes the difference in terms of weight loss or weight gain. And so they found both these things just stayed rock steady from 20 years old to 60. And then at 60 years old, it started falling off at about 0.7% per year. So even then, it's not a big precipitous drop, right? And you have to consider too, when do people get obese? It's middle of life. It's not really end of life. Elderly people don't really spontaneously start to get obese for various reasons. One, their appetite goes down. Two, a lot of them have difficulty with chewing and swallowing, even hyperpalatable foods. So I'm not saying that nobody can get obese over the age of 60, but for the most part, people who become obese do so in their 30s and 40s. And what I would submit is it's more lifestyle choices and more like overall lifestyle. People start to have kids, they get more stressed. Their jobs are more demanding. They don't have the freedom they did in their 20s and 30s to exercise like they would or just be more active. They're sitting at a desk all day. Like I said, they're more stressed out and their food choices start to reflect that. They start drinking more, it's people get really offended when you kind of say, well, this is lifestyle choices, because it feels very attacking. It feels like you're putting blame on somebody. But I'm just saying that that's just the reality. Now, again, am I saying that there's nobody out there who's obese who has a slow metabolism? No, that's not what I'm saying. There definitely can be people And we know that people who have like hypothyroidism and those sorts of things, that can cause about up to a 25% reduction in your BMR. But this idea that you can have such a slow metabolism that you cannot impose a calorie deficit is just, it's not true. And even when we look at like metabolic rates in adults of obese versus non-obese people, not only do none of the studies show that obese people have slower metabolic rates, quite a few studies show they actually have higher total daily energy expenditure, even when you correct for having increased lean body mass. So this idea that obese people are obese because of a slow metabolism is simply not true. Now, I'm not saying they don't have other challenges. There's quite a few studies to show that like obese people have a different like reward sense with food, that it's a much greater reward in their brain compared to, you know, lean people, those sorts of things. So I used to be kind of like, if you're obese, it's all your fault. It's all personal decisions and you're just lazy. And I've kind of come more to the middle ground on that. I think that there is personal decisions, but I think that the way you were raised, your genetics, traumas you had when you were younger, all those can make a difference in terms of how difficult it is for you to be adherent to a nutritional program.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it has half to do with your genetics, and to blame the other half on just being older. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's your genetics. That's going to play a huge part, but you can't just say it's because I'm getting older. What are you doing when you're getting older? Are you as active when you were younger? Are you lifting weights? Have you lost muscle mass because you're not training, you're not playing sports anymore? And so if you compare people on a pound for pound scale, their metabolisms are the same. But if you're getting older and you stop exercising, you stop being active, and you start eating like shit, of course you're going to gain weight. So to blame your metabolism, it's like useless, really. That's putting it elsewhere rather than putting it on something that you can control, that's in your control. So I think that it's important for people to realize you can do something about this. Don't just blame aging. Blame the things that are associated with aging. Sitting back, laying down. Like, compare, how active were you when you were younger? Are you still active now? So you can in fact do something about it. And so rather than blaming metabolism, just blame yourself. That's my main issue with the whole metabolism thing.
Yeah, my PhD advisor, Dr. Don Layne, legend in the field, he had a great quote, and he said, genetics only loads the gun for obesity. It's behavior that pulls the trigger. And I think, you know, when it's very difficult to talk to people about this, because I've seen this big divide in society overall. Just in one hand, we have kind of determinism, which is nothing is your fault, everything's fated, you don't have control over your life, and you're just responding to traumas and how you're hardwired. You don't actually have free will. And then the other side, we have people that are saying everything is a choice. You know, what happened when you were younger has no determinism on what happens later. And I think the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. I probably lean more towards the free will side, you know. But I always tell people, like, okay, if you accept that nothing is your fault, that's actually really demotivating, because if that's the case, you can't change. Like, there's no impetus for change. You might as well not even try. Now, that can feel very relieving for your ego in the moment, but how helpful is that as a long-term strategy? Whereas, you know, I kind of take the responsibility as freedom kind of approach. Like, okay, hey, if you've done all these things wrong, that's actually beautiful, because that means you have so much room for improvement that when you just start to fix a few small things, like, your life's going to improve so much. And I even look at this from, you know, just an overall, like, I'll put it out there. Like, I go to a therapist every week just to work on myself, just to work on things I'm not good at, you know, because I have like triggers and stupid stuff from my childhood that makes it difficult for me to do certain things. But those things might never be easy for me, but I feel like I can always get better. And I would say that to people who are overweight, obese, who really struggle with this is, hey, yeah, you may never be a fitness model on a cover of a magazine because of the way you were raised and because of how difficult things are for you, but you can always get better. And that should be the goal, is getting better. And I think a lot of people, even in the fitness industry, especially with all the misinformation out there, do low carb, do low fat, vegan, carnivore, whatever, intermittent fasting. People are so confused. It feels like the bar to entry of fitness is so high for many people that they go, I'm just not even going to try. And so again, one of the things I really try to do is take the mystery out of this so people feel empowered to actually be able to change their life.
And I really like that, how you mentioned genetics loads the gun. And I would add to that, genetics and life situations and circumstances, that loads the gun. But in the end, you're the one that decides, are you going to pull that trigger? You know, of course, it makes it harder. Everything that's thrown at you, your job, career, health, all these different things. But you, in the end, are the deciding factor. Are you going to exercise? Are you going to eat? Which brings me to the next point.
Next time on Coach Greg.
What research publications have you done? I've seen PhDs say things where I'm like, what? You can't get people to take you serious if you don't have abs, you know? Hey, fuck the research. If for you in particular feel more satiated on a ketogenic diet and it feels easier for you, then do that.